Good evening, and thank you all for joining us here at Laurel Ridge. We are at Jenkins Hall. We made it. We did it. We made it to debate 4 out of 4. Hopefully you all have tuned in and joined us on this journey. If not, I would highly encourage you to check out Page Valley News' YouTube channel. I know Mr. Arrington is going to talk a little bit more about the social media, where you can go to find out all that information. My name is Ryan Cubbage. I've had a privilege and pleasure of hosting these debates. It's the easy job. I leave the hard stuff to all the candidates. I do want to encourage you all, please, this election season, to get out and vote. A lot of great men and women have died for the right for us to express our voices. And just a few things to touch on here. So early voting for the general election did begin on September 22nd. The last day of early voting will be Saturday, November 4th. Remember that Tuesday, November 7th is Election Day, so polls are open at your assigned polling place from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. If you have any questions, you can call 540-743-3986. One thing I do have to say is a big shout out to Laurel Ridge. They've been more than gracious to allow us to come here, host these debates and these interviews. And I also want to tell you all again to make sure you're getting your information, be informed this election season, whether or not you're watching our videos or you're going online to watch some of the candidates' videos, you're reading the paper, you're calling them, you're sending them mail, you're shooting a flare, whatever you have to do. One also personal thing that has been asked many times, I don't think I'm related to you guys, all right? I'm sure there's a common ancestor somewhere there, but I'm not sure where it is.
Down the line.
Down the line. So, but no, all jokes aside, a big thank you to the candidates for joining us tonight. And hopefully you all will get something out of this and will help you make an informed decision this November. Without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Arrington and the candidates.
Thank you. Okay. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth and final planned debate among candidates here in the 2023 contested races in Page County, hosted by Page Valley News. We hope to enlighten the voters of Page County by going a little more in depth with the candidates who participate by discussing issues important to that office. We would like to take this opportunity real quick to thank all of the candidates who participated in our Q&As on PageValleyNews.com. We had a 100% participation by the candidates, and voters can review those Q&As to get more information about the candidates on our website in the county section. The first three recorded debates or discussions were recorded with Thomas Bauserman for Clerk of the Court. For Commissioner of the Revenue, Paula Kibler for District 2 seat on the Page County Board of Supervisors, and then just released today at noon as we filmed this on October the 4th, Kim Bailey and Stephanie Breeden talked about their views related to the clerk of the Page County Circuit Court position. And you can see those on our YouTube channel. Simply go to PageValleyNews.com and click on the videos that are in the corresponding articles in our opinion section, or you can go directly to our YouTube channel. We would again like to take this opportunity, as Ryan said a moment ago, to thank Laurel Ridge Community College for once again allowing us to record these interviews from the second floor conference room of Jenkins Hall. This evening, as I said, we're filming on Wednesday, October the 4th. We will be airing this video on Wednesday, October the 11th. And we're focusing on the race for Sheriff of Page County. Both candidates were given an invitation to this evening's debate. Incumbent Chad Cubbage declined our invitation last night around 11 o'clock, and we will read his response in a few minutes. We'll offer that up as his opening statement. Now we want to welcome independent challenger and Stanley Police Captain Aaron Cubbage. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for participating. We do think this is an important process, and we appreciate all of the candidates who have participated. So the way we're going to start off tonight, we are going to have some questions here that we have prepared for you. We're going to read from Chad's comments in a moment, but I'm going to allow you to go ahead and start off now and tell people out there a little bit about yourself, who you are, why you're running for office, and kind of an opening statement.
Sure. My name is Aaron Cubbage, and I am running for Page County Sheriff this year. I've spent almost 21 years of law enforcement in Page County. I hit the 21st anniversary towards the middle of this month. I have
I currently serve as the captain for the Stanley Police Department, and I served 17 years at the Page County Sheriff's Office. I started out way back in 2002 as a part-time jailer, and I moved into the patrol division as a corporal, eventually a sergeant, and then I moved from the sergeant position in patrol to the sergeant position in investigations. I then moved up to the lieutenant and eventually captain of the division over the general and narcotics units of the investigations unit. And I was there for 17 years. I now serve, as I said, as a captain of the Stanley Police Department, and I'm married to my wife, Melinda, 15 years. I have a son that's 13 years old. And I'm running for sheriff of Page County because I believe that we can do better. I believe we can be more efficient, more transparent, and I plan to bring the Page County Sheriff's Office into 2023 where we belong.
Very well. We're going to start off here with something that Ryan kind of opened up about, talked about. A lot of cubbages in Page County.
Quite a few.
Sometimes hard to keep track of who's who, but I think it's a fair statement to say that there's a lot that you and Chad share in common. Is that a fair statement?
In some ways.
And well, let's just look at some basic checklist items. You're both white Christian males. You both grew up in Page County. You both entered law enforcement as a career. You both have the same parental grandparents. Okay. So tell me, what are the differences between the two of you that set you apart?
The difference between my opponent and I is I have invested my entire career in law enforcement into growing. So I started in law enforcement, like I said, in 2002, and since I began my career, I always wanted to learn as much as I could. So I started in the patrol division, and I was able to learn some leadership techniques there, and then that carried over to investigations. One of the big things that stands out between the two of us is during my time as an investigator and commander of the investigations division, I've had an opportunity to investigate and supervise investigations involving murders, suicides, frauds, aggravated malicious wounding, sexual assaults, child cases, and it's really given me an extensive, in-depth career. And during that time also, I've been able to continue my education. And the reason I continue my education is because I wanted to be the best law enforcement officer I could be. I'm not in competition with anybody. I just wanted to do the best I could do. And when I retire, eventually I'd like to teach. So in 2001, I earned my bachelor's degree in government and pre-law. In 2018, I finished my master's degree in criminal justice. And then just this spring, I finished my PhD in criminal justice, all from Liberty University. So it was always important for me to really focus on law enforcement as a career and not just a job. That's why I got into law enforcement. That's why I've stayed, and that's what I've enjoyed to do.
Well, we talked about the fact that, both of you have the last name Cubbage. Does it make it a little more difficult running against someone you used to run around with at grandma's house, or that you knew when you were little, or that, hey, I've got an old picture of y'all in old uniforms with your arms around each other?
Yeah, so that goes back into probably early 2000s. No, I absolutely love my cousin. I love my family. I just see things differently from a law enforcement perspective. That's what it comes down to. There's no hate in my heart. We just have differences in how we see the future of Page County. And I think there's issues with where we're at as a sheriff's office. I was approached about my intentions to run, asked if I'd be interested in running. And I said, the only way that I'm going to run is under two conditions. One, we can identify deficits at the sheriff's office level that need to be fixed. And two, I only would run is if I could make sure it was not a vindictive campaign. And my entire campaign and focus, especially over the last year, has been nothing but what's best for Page County, what the problem is, and what I'm going to do to fix it within the confines of what we have in Page County. Anything that you see that I've put out is within what we can do as a community. I think I've talked to people in the past, we've always waited for Wallace to come back. We've waited for, Bluebell to come back, and it's not coming. And, we were talking about rehabilitation facilities. They're not here. So one of my major goals when I started this campaign was to make sure anything I put out to you and to everybody else is to make sure that you understand it's something that we can do. It's something we can do better. And there's other things I would like to do, and I've been chewing on, but right now I haven't put them out because right now I don't think they're feasible. So everything is focused on, and that's the good thing about being a law enforcement officer in Page County. You know what the county needs, you know what the community needs. And everything I've done in my career is focused on the community needs.
Well, one of the number one issues that you've discussed, certainly your opponent has discussed, he mentioned it in the Q&As that PVN did earlier, and that's with regard to the growing drug problem in the county. Monthly indictments are largely made up of Class 5 felonies for possession of a Schedule 1-2 drug. And that's been the case for quite a long time. We've seen court cases increase. We've seen incarceration increase. The housing at the jail, which we'll talk about in a moment, being more and more crowded. And we've seen the ripple effects that drug use and addiction has with our children, our families, our schools, our resources in the community. So I know this is a question you've answered before and you've been asked before, but I'm going to ask it again. What will you do to address the issue in Page County and make it better?
So one statistic you left out there is in 2019, in the state of Virginia, the average overdose death per capita in Page County is higher than the average rate. I just found that today. I was digging around some statistics to kind of see how the drug problem in our county impacts us. And every county around us is impacted on what's going on with our drug problem. So I look at our drug problem from two perspectives. The first perspective is an enforcement perspective. So right now, drug arrests are high, and a lot of what you're seeing with drug arrests are the same people going in and out of our jails. In fact, a few years ago, the captain of the jail at the Page County Sheriff's Office even noted that about 90 to 95% of the people who are in our jail right now are reoffenders. So right now, I haven't been able to find any recidivism studies that show us exactly what those numbers are. I'd love to see that later. But we've got them going in and out again and again. So you still have to have the enforcement aspect. People are like, you're not going to enforce drugs. That's not the case. The way I look at enforcement are 2 points. One, from a distribution angle. So when I was in the captain of investigations, that's one of the things we focused on was the distribution of drugs coming into the county. We got to cut that off as best as we can. And then 2, there's a code section in Virginia under nuisance code. It's a nuisance code section that allows local governments to work with law enforcement to provide ordinances to shut down drug houses. We've got the same people going in and out again, and they're going to the same properties again and again. So what I want to do is put some things in place so that owners are notified, hey, your house that you're renting from Front Royal, it's here in Stanley or in Shenandoah and Luray, Rileyville, is a confirmed drug house. You got to shut it down or you're going to suffer sanctions from the county. And until we start doing that, we're really going to lose that opportunity that we've missed several years now moving into this. The second side of it is I see a recovery and a prevention side of it. And so people are like, well, this sounds like social work. It's not. It's prevention. So I just talked about the recidivism, people coming in and out. That's why I created the Dove Project. The Dove Project is created to combine all of our services in our county to meet people where they're at as they come out of jail or to prevent them from going in. An extension of that right now is what my church is doing with Free Indeed. They come in, our church babysits for their children. They provide a meal. They sit down and talk about their recovery and how they're doing. And last week we had like 24 people there. We need to start getting tuned in with where people are at because I think there's a big misconception about recovery in Page County. I think a lot of people think, just like on the TV show, you have a drug problem, you get in a minivan and off the floor do you go. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of steps in between where people need to be connected with the resources they have just to get a meal or just to find a connection of someone that's away from the drug problem. The 2 things I've always heard in my career are I can't get away from the people that I use with, and there's nothing for me in Page County. And I've created the Dove Project to meet those 2 needs, and they're very basic. It's just about using what we have to connect our people with the resources they need to get them in that spot. And I ran it through people before I put it out that I've been in these positions before. Mm-hmm. I said, listen, if this is a bad idea, please tell me. If it wouldn't have helped you when you were at your lowest point, please tell me. They're like, no, this is the bump that I could have used. So it's not rocket science. It's just reaching out to people and treating people like they are.
Well, there was the big recovery weekend event. International Recovery Day was celebrated at Page County High School, I believe, just this past weekend. Taylor Alger was very involved in that. I think you've worked with her on some different committees and programs and things. So what I'm hearing from you is that you don't think we can just arrest our way out of the problem.
Well, there's no jurisdiction in the country that can arrest their way out of the drug problem. If you look at the Prince William County Police Department, they have a $500 million budget. That's a tremendous budget. They still have the same drug problem that we have. There's other jurisdictions around the country that have these tremendous budgets. They have all these resources and they still have a drug problem. And until we get to the point of where we understand we have to do enforcement, absolutely, you have to make arrests, but we've got to identify ways on I call it the other side of trying to keep people away from those situations. And that's where the free will choice comes in, and we can get into a lot of that. Well, but we got to do some things different. We've been doing the same thing for 30 years.
Well, that sounds like, too, it might alleviate some of the problems of the next issue I was going to bring up, talking about incarcerating folks. And if if you're just trying to arrest your way out of the problem, you're having more and more incarcerations, and you're housing more inmates, you've either got to additionally crowd an already overcrowded jail, which is now costing a lot in maintenance, or we have to add on to it, or we've got to do something, or we've got to pay more to ship inmates to other jurisdictions, which we're spending a tremendous amount of money on. I'm not blaming the current administration. That's just a fact of what we have to do. And then there's been talk for as long as I've been here, over 2 decades, 20, 25 years, and I'm sure it goes back longer than that, of talk of building a new jail. Right. So what I'm circling around to here is that with all of those things considered, what do you think is the answer? Is it building a new jail? Do we need an addition on the existing jail? What do we need to do, or do we need just to go ahead and hold our nose and plunge in to a $50-60 million capital project? What's the answer?
Yeah, so right now that's the $100 question.
Or the $50 or $60 million question.
Well, it's a $50-60 million question. So it's kind of went away at the moment, because I know right now that nobody wants a jail in their backyard. So that's been the battle for the last 20 or 30 years. The last figure that I heard personally was like $60 million right off the bat if we built a facility here. So I know that my opponent has looked at other avenues outside of the county, and they've all kind of fallen apart. So right now, to me, it comes down to a cost analysis that's not available just yet, because that $60 million that I just said, I think is several years old. So if you look at inflation since 2015 to 2023, it's went up 23%.
Well, is it even an option still on the table for us to join the regional jail up in Front Royal?
To my understanding,
RSW, I think.
And keep in mind, I'm not involved in these conversations, so I want to make sure I'm being fair to my opponent and everybody else. To my understanding, no. To my understanding,
I think that's correct.
To my understanding, there's no available options right now.
Because we tried that, if I'm not mistaken, within the last 7 or 8 years to go back to them and say, hey, maybe we made a mistake way back when, and could we get in? And I think the answer was no.
Right.
Because I think they're even looking at some crowding issues. Right?
Well, so right now we have what we have. So right now the average daily population of our jail is about 65 inmates. So if you go back to previous administrations,
now if you count all of the ones that are shipped out, it's around 200.
I'm not counting them.
Okay.
I'm counting just inside
I just wanted to clarify,
and I was going to get to that. So there's inmates we keep here in our jail, and there's inmates that we send away. So no matter how many we keep here in our jail, we're still going to have inmates we got to send away. But right now the problem we have is we're keeping an average daily population of 65 inmates. Okay, if you go back to the Sheriff Thomas administration, he kept about 15 more. And the problem is, if you take his administration in 2015, before it turned over to my opponent's administration, all the way up to 2022, inflation costs included, our food overages are more with my opponent than they were with Sheriff Thomas. And he was keeping 15 more people. So we've got to look at, okay, where's that money going? The last look I saw was, I think, $219,000 over in our food budget in the last 8 years. We've got a garden that is absolutely great when you look at it, but there's no paperwork that shows a stream of revenue of where we're saving money from the sheriff's office to the county. There's nothing. In fact, we've spent money. It's about $9,000. So a lot of what we have is it's honestly management issues. And if you think about it like this, for every inmate we send down the road, the approximate cost, and it varies per year. I think the state records go back right now to 21, 22, because they're about a year or two behind. You're looking at about $50 a day, and that's not counting your comp time, overtime, part-time, and your transportation to and from food, and that's not counting just the other general expenses that come along with that. So we've got to get back to it. Right now, our I don't want to get too far ahead, but our budget at the sheriff's office is more overspent than any other sheriff's office.
Well, before we go to the budget, which is my next leading question.
I thought I was a little ahead.
We knew we were going to talk about it, but because everybody does. But I want to stay on this jail thing for a minute.
Sure.
I want to. So you said there's options and there's different things. So if you become sheriff and somebody gave you a magic wand and said, how do we fix this overcrowding issue? What is it? Is it building a new facility? Is it trying to make what we have work more efficiently? I'm pinning you down to
Oh, sure.
specific.
So money's not a problem.
Well,
I mean, you say magic wand, you got to be more specific. I'm going to challenge you to that.
okay, I'm gonna take away the magic wand,
Take
but
away
I'm
the
gonna
magic wand.
but I'm gonna say you have to tell me which way we're going.
I'll tell you which way we're
Okay,
going. I'll just
okay.
make sure the circumstances are straight.
All right, I'm gonna take
So,
away the.
I'm gonna make it easy on you.
fantasy
Let's
world.
say everything is in line, and we have the opportunity to invest either way. That's probably the fairest way. So everything in line with the investment that we would have as a county, it'd be better to have it here if we could find the place. Because you got to think about it. Right now, we've got a lot of people that work in our jail, and I'd like to see them keep their jobs. Plus, we'd have people come into our county to visit people that are in our jail. It would increase commerce. This has been discussed 20, 30 years ago. But there was a lot of debate on, well, we don't want a regional sized jail. And I think when people think of a jail, they think of these towering institutions. But, if you go to Front Royal, you go by, there's at the regional jail up there, it looks like a library. Yeah. So all things in perfect conditions, I would like to see it here because we've got guys that have 20 years in their career that work in our jail. Yeah. If the jail moves away, like they were planning on doing it, they're not going to be able to have their job unless they travel.
Well, but even more so in terms of saving money. I mean, we've got people traveling down to Emporia, down in Greenville County.
They're
we got
going all
people
over the state.
to Dillon and Buckingham County.
Absolutely.
So, and I'm not talking about the families that have to visit and the inconvenience of that. I'm talking about the transportation. I guess you got some video conferencing for court cases and stuff, but there's still transport, and that's gas and time for at least two deputies and
yeah. And you also got to look at it from the perspective of if you look at it from just a cost perspective, and if you build a jail that's larger than what we need, then you have other inmates where we could be making money.
Right. We could bring it in.
Because what's happening is these other facilities are making money off us. They're taking money out of our pocket.
Of course, you'd hate to think about incarceration being a form of a revenue stream, but yes, I get what you're saying. It absolutely could flip the script on that a little bit. Of course, you just got to come up with 50 or 60 million to get it.
Yeah, that's just the magic wand.
No, I think ultimately, it's interesting. So ultimately a new jail would, and I think that's probably long term what is probably going to have to happen.
I don't know that you or I will see it.
Interesting.
We'll see. With the way that our revenue streams are coming into the county right now, I don't know what that's gonna look like a win. But at some point, we're going to have to pick up that ball and do something with it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, behind the issue of drugs, I'd say the second most talked about issue in the race has been the sheriff's budget. The incumbent has been criticized for going over budget nearly every year of his 2 terms. As it stands now, it has stood out. It's been called out by the Board of Supervisors. It's been called out by a number of people, so this is not anything new. You've heard people talk about it. And one of the reasons is because it's one of the only departments that has done that. Even the school system, which is the largest chunk of the budget, typically turns in funds at the end of the year back to the county. So, but in fairness to the sheriff, and in fairness to previous sheriffs, because he's not the only one who's ever gone over budget. Sheriff Thomas went over budget. Sheriff Prescraves went over budget. It is a situation where you have incidents that you can't control, where there was that incident, say, 7 or 8 years ago, where someone was being arrested or whatever, and there was a shootout, and the person was shot. And
under Sheriff Thomas.
And you had under Sheriff Thomas, exactly. Mm-hmm. And there was close to $100,000. I heard $80-some thousand in medical bills, related to that. So there are things that come up that you can't control, and of course that is the justification that the sheriff has said to the Board of Supervisors. So, in fairness to him, not everything is within his control. So, with all of these moving parts, all of these unknowns, how do you stay in budget?
The way you stay in budget is you watch your budget lines as you spend. And this is the key. So, I've worked our budget. So, when I was the captain of investigations at the Page County Sheriff's Office, I oversaw about $1 million of that budget. That included operations, and it also included salaries and benefits. And whenever we would make an expenditure, we would get a receipt back and a printout of what came out of that line item and what it went to, and also the percentage that's still left in that line item. So we had almost a live update of how much money was spent, where it's at, and where it's at within the fiscal year. One of the things that I was a proponent of, because to speak to the things that you can't control, is, and this is what the county asked us to do, and I think it's fair. A lot of people give the Board of Supervisors a hard time, but they're there to watch the money. Otherwise, our taxes go up, and then they're getting the what for in public. So all the county ever asked us to do was watch your line items. If an expenditure, God forbid, like that comes up where somebody shot, and I think the tune was about more close. It was a little closer to $200,000, not 80 or 90, because it was a pretty serious shooting. And if that comes up, they said they will help us out, because right now we hear a lot about inmate medical. Well, there's no line item for that. That is accurate. But what they're saying is to let us know when it comes up, and then we will work with you to help pay for that. My recommendation at the time, and the way I'll do it as sheriff, is if that ever happens, you're going to see me come out publicly. I'm going to say, hey, our line items were in line for XYZ, but this came up out of the blue. It's something that we could not prepare for. I want you to know about it, so that way everybody in the county knows. And in fact, that was my advice at the time. And I think the quote I said is like, hey, put it out there, because you said you never know, some jackwagon down the line might come out and run against you and use it against you. Like, nobody knows these surprises. I had no idea I was going to be the jackwagon. But you've got to be, and this one goes back to the transparency and accountability. The other side of that too is there's things in that those line items right now that can be managed differently to save money. And we're not doing it. That's why this is the most overspent sheriff's administration, including when you give considerations for inflation. And the digital records go back to 1997. I went back to 2000. 3 years prior to that, the budgets were a lot lower and weren't even really worth digging through, because after that you get into the paperwork of digging through files. But it's on how you spend. If you look at this past year, under budget. And if you think, well, what's the difference between this year and previous years? So the only other time that our current sheriff has been under budget was in 2015 to 2016, when there was an exchange from Sheriff Thomas to him. The first part of that year, 6 months, was under Sheriff Thomas. The second part was under Sheriff Cubbage, under budget. After that, everything was over. This year, we're under budget. It's an effort. You look at it's like anything else that you have, the household income. If I go over budget, I'm responsible for it. Our county, we pay high taxes. And when we were talking about the expenditures from the Page County Sheriff's Office, it's even more important than our personal budgets, because it's not just my money, it's our money. And you've got to watch on every single dime that goes out that door. And when you make that effort, that's when you see the decreases. And that's what we're seeing this year. My dad always says competition is good for business, and we're seeing that. This year, we're going to be about $50,000 to $60,000 in the black. So when you got somebody nipping at your heels, it's like, okay, we don't need to put the 15th layer of paint on this building or that wall. We need to conserve. And I would definitely argue that that's where we're at right now.
It's interesting that it was over budget for 6 consecutive years or 7, and then all of a sudden in budget. But let's keep on moving here. And I want to mention at this point, I asked both candidates, had they been here, to bring 3 questions for their opponent. I just want to mention that was one of Aaron's questions for the incumbent sheriff about the budget and problems with that. Another question had to do with staff, and I want to get into that, that being my next area. Dealing with staffing, you said in your Q&A responses to the Page Valley News that you wanted to, quote, change the culture of the Page County Sheriff's Office. What did you mean by that?
So since 2019, over 56 people have left full-time positions at the Page County Sheriff's Office. The reason they're leaving those positions in 99% of the cases is due to the culture of the agency. Right now, there's a failure to lead from the top. And what we've got going on now is we've got people participating in extramarital affairs they shouldn't be involved with. It's causing a collapse in the structure of the sheriff's office. We've got things running wild that should be brought in.
How does something in their private life affect their public job?
Oh, it definitely affects it. When you're looking at, so when we take an oath at the Basic Law Enforcement Academy, we take an oath to maintain ourselves above reproach as much as we can. It's not saying that we're any better than anybody else, but if I'm going to be coming to you and I'm going to be arresting you for any kind of crime that you may have committed, you want to look at me and say, you know what, that guy, he has integrity. And the way I look at it is, if you can't honor the bond between you and your spouse, and you're going to lie about that, what else are you going to lie about it? And that's where the beauty of an at-will employee comes in. Now, I'm not saying that if I'm sheriff, I'm not going to have people that work that have had an affair. That's possible. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I will do is change the culture of what's accepted. And I think that starts the first day. You walk in the door and say, listen, this is going to be the culture we're going to have. I'm going to adhere to everything I'm telling you that I want you to do, and we're going to do it together. It's not you do it and I'm going to do something different. And I think once you start changing that, you also start changing the sheriff's office to more of a family-friendly situation. For example, any of my events, I'm not having alcohol. I want families to feel like they can come out and hang out and have a good time. I want people to bring their kids. There's law enforcement officers that I know that privately struggle with alcoholism. I'm not going to put it out there for them. I want our law enforcement officers to live as healthy lives as they possibly can. And as a leader, as a sheriff, I want to do everything I can to facilitate that. I don't want guys coming out and campaigning for me. I'm not requiring them to do that. If they want to do that, that's on them. But their time off should be spent with their families. They shouldn't be out here running around putting up signs for me unless they absolutely want to do it. But I'm not going to make any direct or indirect pressure for them to do that. And I think when you start changing the culture of a sheriff's office.
So you're saying that deputies on the clock have been campaigning for the sheriff?
I didn't say that.
Okay.
Keep
going.
I said as a sheriff, I'm not going to put direct or indirect pressure on my deputies to campaign.
But the implication is there.
The implication is there, and I believe that is there.
Okay.
I can't attest to who's doing it on the clock or not, or if it's happening. But there's definitely, because I'll say this. So in my experience, my personal experience, and the experience of people that used to work there was direct and indirect pressure put on people to campaign. Period. It is what it is. And that's the truth. Now, some people want to campaign. That's perfectly fine. And it's the same for my opponent. But most sheriffs, if you look at any professional grade sheriff, they're not putting pressure on their employees to campaign for them.
The total staff there is what? Is it 85, 100? I don't know.
If you include part-time, I tell people between 90 and 100.
Okay,
I think there's 72, 73 sworn or something like that.
Okay, so out of 90 to 100 employees, you're telling me that over the last 8 years there have been 56? Over 56 turnover. Now, has that resulted in, I don't know what the right term is, and a drain on the experience and training that was there?
Oh, absolutely. Most of the people that have left full-time positions have been in veteran roles. So we've lost thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars out the window. Now people say, well, so what you're going to do is go in and get rid of all the young guys. Absolutely not. We have to have young blood coming into any type of organization. If you look at any of the Fortune 500 companies, they want that balance. We should be the same as the sheriff's office. When I started in law enforcement, I was 24 years old, and I was a knucklehead just like any other 24-year-old. But I had good men to lead me, and that's the key. At that point in my life, I didn't know that I didn't know. So I had people leading me, and I want to provide the same thing for our youngsters because we've got a lot of good people.
So even though there's a lot of younger guys, a lot less experienced guys, maybe guys who need training in various areas, you're not going to go in and clean house.
No, you don't go in.
If you win.
Yeah,
if you win. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. If I win, I'm not cleaning house. Most of the time, if you look on average, it's probably about a 15 to 20% clean out rate, and that's typically of leadership roles. And what happens is the leaders know that there's probably going to be a change, so they try to make people underneath of them scared to think everybody's going, and that's where these crazy rumors start. You couldn't do it even logistically because you'd be the only one answering calls for service, and it's impossible. So I am not cleaning house.
All right. Well, I'm going to go into your second question, and this one I'm going to read aloud, and I'm going to have you elaborate on it, that you brought for your opponent had he participated tonight. And I apologize, folks, to the format. I said I was going to read Chad's response to me earlier. I will do that when we wrap up. I said I was going to do that at the onset. I do apologize for forgetting that because I do want what he sent us to at least be his voice here tonight as the only representation he gave us. But I did forget that. I will circle around to it. Your second question you had for Chad, if he had been here tonight, why did you stop doing pre-employment polygraphs or lie detectors, pre-employment drug screens, and random drug screens for your deputies and staff? Now, I have two questions related to your question.
Okay.
Number one, why did you choose to pose that question? And number two, isn't that isn't that part of requirements or state requirements or something? All the things, a pre-employment drug screen, random drug screens, and for your deputies and staff, isn't that? And even polygraphs, isn't that already
a
requirement? It's not.
So Sheriff Thomas instituted the polygraph. It was initially used for criminal investigations, and then he eventually grew it to where it was used for pre-employment. And what that does is it prevents you from getting people into law enforcement that shouldn't be there. That ended in 2016. Also, what ended in 2016 was random drug screens. So over the last 8 years, the Page County Board of Supervisors has given $4,000 to our sheriff's office to use for pre-employment drug screens and random drug screens, and it's never been used.
Not even the pre-employment. The random, I might understand a little bit, but the pre-employment I thought would be
the budget
automatic.
line is completely intact. In fact, the county is looking to take away that $4,000.
There's no state requirement that says there has to be a pre-employment drug screening for a law enforcement officer. That is surprising.
That's a problem.
That is surprising. I'm a little bit shocked by
If I'm wrong on that, I'll let you know.
Okay,
But to my knowledge, no.
I find that to be a little bit. But now, why did you bring that up? Why do you pose that question?
We are giving our law enforcement officers a pistol and a rifle, and we're telling them to go out there and protect us. We're asking them to make judgment calls on when people should be arrested and their rights taken away from them, because we're taking them into custody. We've got to work to get the best people we can, and I know that that's a challenge. It's been a challenge since I've been in law enforcement, but you've got to bring people in that you can trust, and you've got to bring people in that are capable of doing the work without having the baggage that can slow people down. Because here's what happens: if you bring the wrong guy in and you find out he's been doing the wrong things for years and years. I mean, there's examples all of it nationwide. Cases go back, they get overturned. If you got a guy that lies, these cases get thrown out, and it becomes, you've heard of fruit from the poisonous tree. It just deteriorates everything. Plus, even more importantly, it deteriorates the public trust and integrity that you have within your sheriff's office. Law enforcement officers nationwide can only work within the power that their communities give them. Mm-hmm. And if we lose that trust, we lose that ability to properly serve.
I'm not disagreeing with anything you say, but I'm going to play devil's advocate on the part of the for Chad. Recent incident, everybody knows about it, about a former officer who was recently let go over some charges. You, as a manager, you can't control the private lives of 100 different employees. I mean, is it fair? I mean, that story that broke end of last week when the former deputy turned himself in has really been used against the sitting sheriff.
Absolutely.
And, do you think it's really fair that he take the blow? You think it's fair that he takes the brunt of the individual actions of one guy? Well, tell me why.
The reason it's fair is because it's completely unacceptable that we don't have a hiring process in place that prevents that to the 99th degree. Okay, so people were like, well, polygraph isn't completely going to take care of all that. They're not completely reliable. Well, neither is a seatbelt, but we wear them, and it's the best tool we have to prevent us from getting thrown out of a vehicle. Also, keep in mind, national security at the FBI, the federal level, the best military in the world uses polygraph to deter for things like this. If you go to get any kind of classification, this is the things you're doing thorough background checks. If it's good enough for the national security of the United States, I think it's good enough for Page County.
Very well, very well. I have two more issues that I want to bring up, and then we're going to kind of get into the wind down, just to kind of let you know where we're at, and let the folks at home know where we're at in the process. I have two more issues. Let's talk about school safety. That's been an issue that pops up when it becomes a problem, and we had an incident last year at Shenandoah Elementary. And do you feel our schools are safe, and what more can be done to protect them?
I feel that everybody in our county that works in our schools, including our SROs and all of our law enforcement officers, will do anything they can to make sure that our schools are safe. The issue that I've had, and I've raised it over the last year, is over the past 8 years, we've had absolutely no annual or even really training from our sheriff's office to school administrators and staff and teachers on how to respond to an active threat or an active shooter event. Nothing.
Now, there was at least one plan that I know of, but I don't know if it ever actually occurred.
So people are getting a couple of things mixed up. So first of all, there has been training for officers that just started consistently within the last year. Okay. The last active shooter training event where it was a conglomeration of officers was in 2019 before the last election. And now in the last year, and I'll say it, and it's just they're the facts, essentially since it came out that I was going to be running is when you started seeing more of the consistent training. Here's the problem. Page County school systems is not like what it was 30 years ago. We don't have the same teachers that are here every year. We have people that come in out of Richmond, out of Northern Virginia. They were here for a minute and they're gone. You've got to continually train. This has got to be something that's annual. We have done no unified command training. So I was at the Shenandoah incident. I went up there. Everybody's doing their best to help out. Everybody's getting in there. The teachers, the kids, parents, everybody was great. But we've got to work on our coordination. So there's no unified command where someone's setting up outside and we're making sure that everybody is organizing our assets. And none of that's been done. We've had 8 opportunities. If you think about it from a planning standpoint, if you go to the Page County Public School System, they start planning generally in the spring for the following year. So my opponent has had 8 opportunities over almost a decade to put this planning in place to start training. I'm certified in what I'm talking about. It's called Citizen Response to Active Shooter Events. It's under the alert system by Texas State University. And what I'm saying is that when I become sheriff, I'm going to be training. And if it comes down to my trainer can't train them, I'll go teach it myself. I've done it for Stanley Elementary. This is something we have to get on. The LifeSpot app is great. I love the fact that we're trying to get officers through tactical training. But if the people inside the school don't know what to do when that event starts, everybody, if you look at any study, the first 5 minutes of an active threat, an active shooter event, are the most important. And those people in those 5 minutes, how they respond is going to determine a lot of things. If you look at the study with Norris Hall and Virginia Tech, how the individuals responded determined the probability of whether they survived. We have got to train our staff. We've got to train our teachers.
That LifeSpot program the schools bought into, I thought was...
Oh, it's fantastic.
That's an interesting...
And hats off to Dr.
tool.
Johnson. Dr. Johnson, Dr. Paul Johnson went out there, really worked on that.
Yeah.
And then I believe my opponent and Chief Cook actually worked on trying to get the funding to help pay for it. So kudos to them. And it's great, but if our people outside the school don't know what to do,
right,
we're still stuck. So that's something that's going to happen year 1 with me. If I'm elected, year 1, we're going to have it in place.
Okay. Last topic I want to talk about, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to bring up any issue that you want before we get into a closing statement, is communication. And this applies in a lot of different areas. So I'm going to kind of go into one by dropping back to the drug issue. One aspect of communication. One of the big complaints, or one of the darts, I guess I would say, that your opponent has kind of thrown at you, or people in his camp have thrown at you, is that drugs are a big problem in Page County, but there are no drug arrests that ever take place in the town of Stanley. Mm-hmm. That you all, the implication, of course, being that you're either ignoring the problem or you're not doing your job. Right. So I'm going to give you the opportunity on this platform to respond to the criticism that I guess Stanley PD is weak on drugs.
Yeah, sure. So everybody has seen Chief Dean's response to that, talking about our drug arrests, and I think they speak for themselves. One thing I've learned throughout this whole process is, so I worked in an agency that was 20 times larger. They had a multi-million-dollar agency. When I was at the sheriff's office, I had control over the narcotics unit that was tied in with Northwest Regional Drug Task Force. Mm-hmm. Now we have 2 narcotics guys that are out. We had canines, the whole 9 yards. Now I work at a department where there's basically 5 of us. We have 1 in school resource, we have the chief, and then we have me on daylight, and then 1 guy on the other side. So one of the things that we changed in recent years was doing searches alone. And the importance of that is you shouldn't be over on the side of the road searching a vehicle by yourself. So that slowed things down quite a bit. But one thing that I've identified, and has actually been kind of a blessing, is to recognize the importance that our police departments and our sheriff's office work together, because they got to have each other. You've got to have an exchange of information. You got to be working together.
That's what I want to ask you about, and I'm going to go ahead and say that I can say this not as rumor, but I have heard Chief Dean at several Stanley Council meetings talk about the lack of communication between the sheriff's department and the police department, and that when many of these drug busts were going on, that they would happen, and his department would never be notified. Now, you're not the chief, but can you vouch for that?
Yes.
Was that happening?
We're not getting notifications. The ones we have
until recently.
The most recent one, I don't know there's been a notification either. I wasn't working the night, so I can't speak to it. And that one was in the county area in outside of the town. But the one that I know we were notified of that we went to was the one that wasn't put on Facebook and filmed.
But you say it's an accurate statement to say that until recently, if the Page County Sheriff's Office had a warrant that was being served or an action that was being taken that they were not including or communicating with the Stanley Police Department. That's a fair statement.
That's a fair statement.
Okay.
That's a fair statement.
All right. Well, so that's one aspect of communication, but I think there's others that come up, and I'm sorry, Chad's not here, but to defend himself, but I'm going to pick on him a little bit. Communication, I think, has been a problem with the department. From the sheriff leaving abruptly at a board of supervisors meeting when he was questioned about the budget, to a showdown with the county administrator over the emergency communications center that ended up with him filing a lawsuit against the county, against Page County. To the media having to find out about incidents on social media. There's no real relationship, and I can speak for other people in the local media, Harrisonburg media, and all that have. We talk.
Can I speak to that?
Yes, and so that's kind of what I'm building up to here. So what are you going to do to improve communication with county government, within the community, with the media?
Okay, so as your sheriff of Page County, I'm going to share with you the successes we have as a community, but I'm also going to take it in the teeth if we have something that goes wrong. That's part of my responsibility as a leader. If I'm going to lead, I've got to be able to take the good with the bad, and I've got to be upfront with you and honest with you about things that happen. You should not hear one of the problems we have in Page County, and I know that we get back and forth with freedom of speech and things like that. I've dealt with that. But one of the issues we have in Page County is we love a rumor. Page County loves a rumor mill. And as your sheriff, I'm going to take it upon myself to make sure I try to shut that down as much as possible. Because when you hear from the horse's mouth, it is what it is. The most recent event, look, that's awful. It's awful that one of our deputies is involved in that situation. But as your sheriff, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say, look, this is what happened. This is what we're changing as far as our hiring procedures. There's not been any discussion about what's being changed with the hiring procedures. There's not been any discussion into is there going to be any kind of investigation into the ongoings within our community to see if there's any violations that could have happened? There's not been any conversation about what's next. Mm-hmm. There was no response until after TV3 made the announcement, after I did a video, and the pressure was there. When it happens, you're going to hear it from me. And there's plenty of examples. This isn't something new. If you go back to 2016, there was a Bedford chief that went through the same thing as my opponent's going through now. He stood up, he sat down for an interview, and he talked about the importance of rebuilding that trust with the community. Mm-hmm. If I stand up and say, look, hey, this is on my watch, this is what happened, you need to hear it from me, I'm going to take it in the teeth, but at least I'll walk away with your respect. Say, you know what, he's going to tell us good and bad. That's what I'm talking about with accountability and transparency. If you're going to be the guy, be the guy.
Yeah. And own up to it, and sometimes crow isn't all that bad if you put a little sauce on it.
We've all eaten crow every once in a while. I mean, it happens to us all.
I think this is an appropriate time now for me to read the statement or the email. I will say this was just an email that Chad sent in response to the invitation to the debate, and then we're going to get into closing any last issue that Aaron wants to bring up and closing statements. So we did invite both candidates, and Sheriff Chad Cubbage responded by saying, "Good evening, Randy. I truly appreciate your patience over the past few weeks regarding my decision whether or not to participate in Wednesday's debate." And we did have a couple of back and forth correspondences. After much thought, discussion, and prayer, I have decided to honor my initial concern and decline a debate. As I expressed to you earlier, the sheriff's race is a highly contentious race impacting many people, particularly employees and family. I respect debates, forums, if they stay on topic and actually inform the candidates, but typically the important issues get sidelined by interruptions and mudslinging. Understandably, some can't fully appreciate the potential fallout from a heated debate among our local officers and law enforcement agencies. This would not be a concern if my candidate were employed by an out-of-county agency. One of my most important roles as sheriff is to foster strong and professional relationships among all law enforcement officers within the county, not divide. As you may have witnessed on social media, Stanley PD and the Page County Sheriff's Office, along with those agencies' officers, have been dragged into the political arena, and it has exacerbated an already tense working relationship. With all of that being said, it's evident that a debate between two county residents and law enforcement officers is not conducive to a healthy or unified community or policing. I am hopeful that my three-part interview will answer questions. I believe this is what he's putting on his website, I believe his political website, that will answer questions, offer insight, and further inform the voters of the great strides and positive direction that the Page County Sheriff's Office is leading. The community knows that I'm available and happy to answer any questions or address any concerns. My cell phone number is listed on my campaign website and Facebook page. In addition, I am happy to meet. As always, I appreciate you reaching out to me. My decision was truly made in what I consider to be the best interest of the community and our law enforcement agencies. I do feel serving for the past 8 years provides much information on my performance and goals. Thank you again for your journalistic contribution to our community. So I do appreciate his response. I told him that I did not agree with it, but I did accept it. And that is the only representation he gave us tonight. So I did want to give him the opportunity to be heard in what he had to say there. So as we close out, I'm now going to give you, Aaron, an opportunity to bring up any specific issue. This is not a general overview, but any specific issue that I did not ask a question about or that we have not discussed that you'd like to bring up now.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to go back to accountability. So you just heard a letter that was written by my opponent talking about the relationship between agencies. And this is after he's publicly talked about how the Stanley Police Department isn't doing what it should be doing. So I have an issue with that. I think it's unacceptable not to show up to something like this. I'm asking you to be the chief law enforcement officer in Page County is the Commonwealth Attorney, but the Page County Sheriff is right in line with them. So I'm asking to be that guy. Every single dollar of my salary, if I'm elected, is paid for by you. This is a job interview with questions from a person that's asking questions and putting me on the spot. And it's my responsibility to be here. If I'm going to tell you that I'm going to protect your constitutional rights, but I'm not going to show up to any kind of forum where there's questions or any kind of debate where there could be someone, giving a different side of things, that's a problem. We all have a right to be privy to our opinions. I've talked to many people in the community that don't see things the way that I do. I've taken some ear chewings since I've been involved in this. It's okay. It's part of it. You have a freedom to say what you want to say. But at the end of the day, it's my responsibility to be here. And when I'm elected, I'm going to be here again, whether it goes good or whether it goes bad. If something happens, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to own it. And I think it's the least that I can do for you because I will be a leader in this community. And if our leaders don't stand up and speak to what's going on, what are we leading? It's my responsibility to tell you what the plans are for the next 4 years. I've been talking about that over the last year, what exactly it is that I'm going to be doing. It's been open for critique. It's been open for argument, and it's been out there. It's been in black and white on my website since January and February, and I talk about it. This week will be the 25th time. And there's a reason I've done that is because I'm developing a track record of where you can hold me accountable. So if in 4 years we come back to this and the Dove Project is nowhere to be found, Randy's going to be sitting here asking me, you said you're going to do this. Why didn't you do that? That's part of holding me to task and holding me accountable. I would say this in my closing remarks. I have made myself as available to the public in Page County as much as I can. You have my personal phone number. I meet you every Monday night at 7:45 live with questions that you've submitted. Next week, I'm going to be going Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday to 4 different locations from Rileyville to Shenandoah to answer any of the questions you have. I don't know who's coming. I don't know if it's going to be a heckler, but it's my responsibility to be there, just like it is tonight. We did it at Trackside Theater. And what's interesting to me is every other challenged group who's been sitting in this seat and other places have done it respectfully and professionally. And there's no doubt in my mind, and I know my opponent well and he knows me well, that we couldn't have done the same thing. And it's a sad day when we can't sit here and do that. And I apologize to you that wasn't able to happen tonight, but I can tell you that if I'm elected and someone wants to debate me, we'll sit here and we'll do it. You have a right to see that, and you have a right to ask questions. And I look forward to serving you as your sheriff. I've spent 21 years here in our county, and I think there's a lot we can do. I've laid out my plans for the next 4 years, and we'll keep on pushing.
Well, you pretty much gave a closing statement, but I'm going to give you one more opportunity because I did have a lead in to the final comment. In some voters' minds, if they're not paying attention to issues or past track records, they may simply look at, hey, you're a first-time guy looking to get into public office. And so I want you to tell me right here and now, this is kind of how I've ended all of the debates so far. Tell me right here and now, as the challenger trying to unseat an incumbent, why people of Page County should vote for you in 2023.
Sure. I have the experience, the education, and the work experience here in Page County to make the changes necessary to our Page County Sheriff's Office to make it efficient and effective, period. I've worked at the ground levels as a servant leader, as a supervisor, and as a teammate. And I know what our county needs. Everything I've laid out to you in my plan since I started this campaign has been heavily vetted to make sure it's something that I can deliver to you within the means of what we have in Page County. So anything I put out there isn't going to come with $1 million price tag that's going to shock everybody when I get in office. Everything that I've done in my career has been geared towards serving you in Page County. I plan to continue doing that as your sheriff. I think a big part of this is being accessible to you. That's why I've shared my phone number. I get calls and texts all the time, and I want them to continue. And I think part of that is being accountable and serving you. And if you look over my track record of the past 21 years, in a lot of ways they do speak for themselves, but I don't mind talking about it. And I would put my law enforcement career up against just about anybody else in Page County. And I can tell you that with my experience and the people that I will have around me, both inside and outside the agency, we're going to get the job done. Will it be perfect? No, because there's nobody that's perfect. But the purpose of law enforcement should be to pursue excellence, and that's what we're going to do at the Page County Sheriff's Office.
Very well. Well, once again, Page Valley News would like to thank Captain Aaron Cubbage for showing up tonight, participating in this debate turn discussion. We'd also like to thank once again Laurel Ridge Community College for allowing us to record here in the beautiful setting here in Jenkins Hall. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Thanks for clicking on the video. And you can also hit that YouTube icon on the top red strip on our homepage of pagevalleynews.com. And don't forget about all the Q&As of all the candidates that are in contested races are also on pagevalleynews.com. We are planning more content on our YouTube channel coming soon following the debates. Stay tuned for that. Don't forget, early voting is already in there. And if you're not registered to vote, I think you got to do that very soon. I'm looking at my notes here, but I can't find the deadline, but it is coming up very soon.
22 days before the election.
Is that right? 28 days before?
22 days before the election.
22 days before the election. I would have thought it would have been right here. But don't forget early voting on the ground floor of the County Administration Building over at 103 South Court Street. They're open 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. Taking your votes, and of course they're going to be open on Election Day from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. on November the 7th. So with all of that said, get out there, vote. For Page Valley News, I am Randy Arrington saying thanks for clicking on our video, and I'll turn it back over to Mr. Ryan Cubbage.
Well, you survived. We made it to the end.
Made it to the end.
Again. So I would like to just take a moment to thank Mr. Arrington. I've had the best seat in the house up front watching all of these, and I can't stress how important it is that we get that information out to the voters. Making an informed choice this November is how we facilitate change in whatever direction that may take. I'd like to thank all the candidates through all the debates, through all the Q&As, through all the efforts they've put out. I'd like to remind everyone that these candidates, we open up our lives, we open up our families' lives, and we've decided on the path of serving this county, which that alone, regardless of where you fall out, is worthy of respect. So please, please, please encourage your friends, your family members, anyone who will listen to get out and have their voice heard this year. And as always, a big thanks to Laurel Ridge, especially Judy Suddeth. She's been a great asset and a tremendous help. I'm Ryan Cubbage. Thank you all for tuning in.